On a crisp spring morning, as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains, the picturesque town of Aspen buzzed with excitement. Tourists from all over had come to experience the beauty of the Colorado wilderness, and today, they were in for a special treat. A scenic flight aboard a Cessna 208 Caravan, renowned for its unrivaled views, was about to take off, offering an aerial glimpse of the stunning Aspen landscape. Among the eager passengers boarding the plane was Captain Maya Bennett, a decorated Air Force pilot who looked every bit the part but in an understated, almost inconspicuous manner. Maya, dressed simply in jeans and a jacket adorned with the emblem of the Air Force, didn't stand out among the others at first glance. Her demeanor was calm, unassuming, even humble. She walked with quiet confidence, her every step betraying nothing of the strength and resilience beneath her composed exterior. But to some, that very simplicity was a point of derision. Preston Harrington, a wealthy executive with a taste for high-end suits and a sharp wit, couldn't resist commenting as he spotted Maya making her way down the aisle. With his perfectly tailored suit and meticulously styled hair, Preston cut an impressive figure, the sort of man used to being admired and catered to. And yet, there he sat, eyeing Maya with disdain. Is she really taking advantage of a free ride? A lowly military clerk, perhaps? He muttered under his breath, his tone laced with contempt. The words were loud enough for a few nearby passengers to overhear, and the discomfort was palpable. Maya, unperturbed, simply took her seat, her gaze drifting to the window, where the vastness of the mountains stretched out before her. Her thoughts were already far from the cabin, from the social games of wealth and power that surrounded her. She had flown through countless storms, fought battles both in the air and on the ground. This flight, this moment, was nothing compared to what she had faced before. As the plane began its ascent, the landscape below unfolded in breathtaking detail. Aspen, with its lush greenery and towering peaks, was a beauty to behold. The laughter and chatter of the other passengers filled the air, but through it all, Maya remained calm. Her mind focused not on the trivialities of others, but on the serenity of the natural world outside. But Preston couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. His gaze lingered on Maya for a moment longer, wondering how someone like her could be in a place like this. His judgment, however, was clouded by his own sense of superiority, and he couldn't help but dismiss her presence as just another misplaced military officer on a free ride. What started as a serene, peaceful flight quickly took a turn for the worse. The first signs of trouble came in the form of a subtle shift in the air. The winds, which had been gentle, began to pick up. Clouds, once soft and fluffy, now began to darken, gathering ominously on the horizon. The temperature dropped, and the mood in the cabin began to shift from one of joy to one of tension. "We're experiencing some turbulence, folks." The pilot's voice came through the intercom, calm but laced with concern. "Please fasten your seatbelts." The passengers complied, some nervously, others still optimistic that this was just a brief discomfort to pass. But as the plane continued to climb higher, the turbulence grew more intense, shaking the aircraft with each passing moment. The cabin filled with uneasy murmurs, and Maya, ever the professional, tightened her grip on the armrest. Her instincts, honed over years of military service, told her that this wasn't a typical storm. Preston, however, was far from calm. His eyes darted around the cabin, unable to quell the rising anxiety in his chest. He shot Maya a glance, the look on his face one of pure skepticism. What kind of pilot wouldn't check the weather before a flight? He muttered to no one in particular, his words dripping with disdain. Maya didn't react, her focus never wavering from the window, watching the sky with practiced vigilance. Then, as if on cue, the storm hit with a force unlike any of them had ever experienced. A massive bolt of lightning tore through the sky, striking the plane with a deafening crack. The entire cabin was filled with an eerie light, followed by a violent lurch that sent the passengers gripping their seats in panic. The aircraft lurched uncontrollably, throwing passengers from side to side. The engines sputtered, and the lights flickered. And then silence. The sudden stillness that followed the lightning strike was deafening. But it wasn't the kind of calm that promised safety. It was the silence before the storm. The plane was spiraling out of control, veering dangerously off course as the instruments began to fail. The pilot, struggling to regain control, collapsed over the controls, unconscious. Chaos erupted in the cabin. Screams filled the air, some passengers crying out in panic, others shouting for help. Preston's face drained of color as he realized that something far more serious was unfolding than he could have ever imagined. The wealth and power that had always been his safety net meant nothing now. In that moment, he was no different from any other terrified soul aboard that plane. Maya, however, remained still, her breathing steady as she assessed the situation. Her training kicked in. Years of military precision and calm under pressure had prepared her for this exact moment. Rising from her seat, she made her way toward the cockpit, her every step measured and purposeful. She reached the cockpit and gently nudged the unconscious pilot aside, securing herself in the captain's seat. With a steady hand, she took the controls. The cabin was filled with murmurs of disbelief. There was no way this woman, dressed in civilian clothes and seemingly unremarkable, could be the one to save them. Yet as Maya spoke into the radio, her voice calm and commanding, the tension in the cabin began to ease ever so slightly. "We are in distress. Requesting emergency assistance," she said, her tone unwavering. Preston, unable to believe what he was witnessing, shot a look of disbelief at Maya. "You can't be serious," he snapped. "You're a military officer, not a pilot. You're not qualified for this." But Maya didn't flinch. She had faced far worse adversities, had commanded fighter jets in life-and-death situations. This was just another test of her skill and resolve. The plane's violent shaking subsided slightly, but it still felt as though the world was coming apart at the seams. Inside the cabin, the passengers were paralyzed by fear, their eyes wide with terror as the realization sank in that they were plummeting towards certain disaster. The deafening roar of the wind outside only added to the panic. And then there was Maya, unfazed by it all, her face a study of calm determination. She secured herself in the captain's seat, feeling the controls beneath her hands. The aircraft was damaged, its systems failing one by one, but there was still hope. She had faced situations like this before, albeit in far more dangerous circumstances, but the training she'd undergone as an Air Force pilot had equipped her for exactly this kind of emergency. She had been through countless simulations, had undergone rigorous training in the most stressful conditions imaginable. But even so, this was different. There was no simulation for real panic, for the sounds of human fear echoing in your ears. Maya's fingers moved with precision, flipping switches, adjusting dials, and calculating the best course of action. She could hear the frantic voices of the passengers behind her, some praying, some sobbing, and others screaming for help. And then, she heard Preston's voice cutting through the noise. "You can't do this," he said, his voice shaky and full of disbelief. "You're not even a real pilot. You're just a soldier. Let the professionals handle this." His words, though laced with contempt and fear, did little to rattle her. Maya took a deep breath, focusing on the task at hand. "Please sit down, sir," she said calmly, her voice unwavering. "I'm in control now." She didn't need to say more. There was no time for arguments or explanations, only action. With a firm grip on the controls, Maya began speaking into the radio, her voice now clear and commanding. "This is Cessna 208. We are in distress. Requesting emergency assistance. I repeat, requesting emergency assistance." Her tone was confident, professional, no trace of hesitation. She was in command now, and there was no room for doubt. The air traffic controller's voice came through the headset, slightly distorted by the static, but clear enough to give instructions. "Cessna 208, we have you on radar. We're guiding you to Eagle County Regional Airport. Follow our instructions carefully. You are cleared for an emergency landing." Maya nodded, even though no one could see her. Her mind was racing, her every thought focused on keeping the plane steady, on maneuvering through the worsening storm. The rain was torrential now, slashing against the windows in sheets. The wind was howling, threatening to tear the plane apart, but Maya was unshaken. She had been trained to think in extremes, to remain calm under pressure. Behind her, Preston's protests grew louder, but she ignored them. She couldn't afford distractions. The passengers, though fearful, began to notice the calm in her movements, the way her hands moved over the controls with such practiced ease. It was a stark contrast to the panic that had overtaken the cabin. Slowly, the tension in the air began to shift. The plane began to level off, its nose no longer diving toward the ground. Maya's steady hand on the controls and her quiet assurance were slowly restoring a sense of hope among the passengers. The sounds of frantic voices behind her began to fade into the background as the passengers started to realize that they might actually survive this. It wasn't just Maya's skill that brought the calm. It was the unshakable confidence she exuded, the sense that no matter how bad things seemed, she would get them through it. She wasn't just a soldier, she wasn't just a pilot, she was a leader. The storm outside raged with fury. The plane lurched and swayed with each gust of wind, and the deafening sound of the rain pounding against the fuselage was a constant reminder of the dangers they faced. Maya's grip on the controls tightened as she fought to keep the plane steady. Each movement, each decision was crucial. One wrong move, and they could be lost. As the plane fought against the storm, Maya's mind worked in overdrive. The systems were failing, communications were spotty, the altimeter was malfunctioning, and the GPS had gone haywire. But none of that mattered. She had been trained to handle situations like this, to think on her feet when everything around her was falling apart. She had trained for every possible emergency, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the chaos that was unfolding in the air around her. Cessna 208, we're tracking your position. The voice of the air traffic controller crackled over the radio, but the static made it hard to hear. You're about 20 miles out from Eagle County. Maintain current heading and altitude. Maya's jaw tightened. 20 miles. In this storm, it felt like 20 years. The rain continued to hammer the plane, the wind howling in her ears, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. She couldn't afford to lose focus now. With one hand firmly on the yoke, Maya adjusted the throttles with the other, trying to keep the aircraft's speed steady while fighting against the wind. The turbulence was relentless, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. It was as though the sky itself was conspiring against her. Inside the cabin, the passengers were clinging to their seats, many of them still unable to fully process the gravity of the situation. A few were muttering prayers, others were crying, and some simply stared out the windows, wide-eyed and silent. Preston, once so full of arrogance and derision, was now sitting in stunned silence, his face pale. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, fear, disbelief, and something else he wasn't willing to admit, respect. He had watched Maya take control of the situation with a calm assurance that was nothing short of extraordinary. He had thought she was nothing more than a soldier, someone out of her element, unqualified to handle such an extreme situation. But now, watching her work, he realized just how wrong he had been. In the midst of the storm, Maya was a beacon of stability. She was unshaken, her movements deliberate and precise. She communicated with air traffic control like a seasoned professional, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding her. And little by little, the passengers began to notice. It wasn't just the way she handled the aircraft. It was the way she carried herself, her quiet authority, the confidence that emanated from her every decision. As the minutes ticked by, Maya's mind raced, running through every possible scenario, adjusting her course, calculating the best way to land. She had one chance at this, one shot to save everyone aboard. The storm may have been fierce, but Maya was fiercer. And as she focused on the runway that would soon come into view, she knew she was ready. As the storm raged outside, the turbulence grew more severe, the plane jolting and swaying like a leaf in a violent windstorm. Yet through it all, Maya's hands remained steady on the controls, her eyes focused on the horizon as she navigated through the nightmarish conditions. Every decision was life or death, and there was no room for mistakes. But Maya was a seasoned pilot, a leader under pressure. The storm could howl, the instruments could fail, but she would not waver. Her grip tightened on the yoke as air traffic control's voice crackled through the radio once more, offering their guidance. Cessna 208, you are cleared to land at Eagle County Regional. We've cleared the runway for you. Maintain your current heading and descend to 2,500 feet. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. The runway was within reach, but the storm was still merciless. The rain came in sheets, and the winds threatened to tear the plane off course. She adjusted the throttle, pushing the plane downward, inching toward the runway with every heartbeat. Every passing second felt like an eternity. In the cabin behind her, the passengers were a mixture of dread and reluctant hope. The fear had not completely left their faces, but the realization that they might actually make it to the ground alive was slowly dawning on them. Maya's calm in the face of this chaos was a steady anchor in the storm, and for the first time since the lightning strike, there was a flicker of optimism. Preston sat rigid in his seat, his face pale and eyes wide with disbelief. He had been watching Maya, and the more he saw, the more he realized how terribly wrong he had been. He had mocked her at the beginning of the flight, dismissed her as some low-ranking officer taking advantage of a free ride. But now, here she was, saving their lives, commanding the situation like a true professional. The arrogance that had once defined him seemed a distant memory, replaced by a deep sense of respect. "Please, just get us down," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible. The harsh realization that his life was in the hands of a woman he had once belittled stung deeply. But there was no time for pride, no time for ego. All that mattered now was the landing. As Maya's hands worked the controls with practiced precision, the runway finally came into view, a faint silhouette through the rain and mist. It felt impossibly far away, as though the storm itself was doing everything in its power to keep them from reaching safety. With a deep breath, Maya began to align the plane with the runway. The wind pushed against the wings, testing her every move, but she fought back, steadying the aircraft with determination. Her eyes flicked to the instruments, then back to the dimly lit runway. She could do this. She would do this. The world outside the window was nothing but a blur of rain, wind, and flashing lights. Maya's hands moved almost mechanically, adjusting the flaps, trimming the wings, and carefully guiding the plane toward the runway. Her heart beat in her chest, but it was steady now. She had one shot to make it. There were no second chances in this kind of situation. Preston's gaze was fixed on the cockpit, watching Maya's every movement with a mixture of awe and terror. He had heard stories of how pilots could land in extreme conditions, but to witness it firsthand was a different experience altogether. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, and the plane seemed to be at the mercy of the weather. But Maya didn't flinch. She was in control. In the cabin, the passengers had fallen silent, each one clinging to hope as they watched Maya's every move. The landing gear lowered, the wheels aligning with the slick runway ahead, and the tension in the air was palpable. Maya's voice came through the intercom, soft but resolute. "Everyone, brace for impact. We're almost there." The words were a comfort, a signal that they were on the final approach. The storm raged around them, but within the plane, there was an unexpected sense of calm. The passengers held their breath, their hands gripping the armrests, their bodies tense. The moment of truth had arrived. With a final, decisive push, Maya brought the plane down. The tires hit the slick runway with a soft screech, and the plane began to skid across the wet tarmac. The rain hammered down, but Maya didn't let up. She expertly guided the plane, using every ounce of skill to keep it under control as the aircraft slowed. The plane slid to a stop, the engines winding down, and a heavy silence filled the cabin. It was over. They were safe. A moment passed before the sound of clapping filled the air. It started softly, a hesitant gesture of gratitude, but it quickly grew into a thunderous applause. Tears streamed down some of the passengers' faces as the gravity of their survival settled in. They had made it. They had survived. Preston was the first to move. He stood up, his knees weak from the adrenaline of the landing. His eyes were wide with disbelief, and his mouth hung slightly open. He turned toward Maya, who was unbuckling her seatbelt and rising from the cockpit. She had done it. She had brought them home. Stumbling toward her, Preston reached out a hand, his voice thick with emotion. How did you do that?" he asked, his words barely a whisper. Maya looked at him, her expression calm, as though this was just another day in the life of a pilot. "I'm a trained Air Force fighter pilot," she said simply. "This is what I do." Her words, so matter-of-fact and humble, left Preston speechless. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. All the derision, all the mockery he had thrown her way earlier seemed meaningless now. His world, once built on money and influence, had come crashing down in the face of true skill and bravery. The passengers slowly made their way off the plane, some still in shock, others hugging each other in relief. Preston stood for a moment longer, watching Maya as she calmly gathered her things. It was impossible for him to shake the sense of humility that now overtook him. This woman, this soldier, had just saved them all. The moment the plane came to a complete stop on the slick runway, the tension that had gripped the cabin slowly began to dissipate, but it was replaced with a new kind of energy, relief. The passengers, who had clung to their seats with white-knuckled hands, were now standing, still dazed, still processing what had just happened. As the crew members opened the cabin door and the cold mountain air rushed in, a wave of applause erupted from the group. Their eyes sparkled with disbelief and gratitude. Maya stood at the front of the plane, quietly collecting her things. Her mission was over, her job done. But there was no visible sign of triumph on her face, only the calm satisfaction of a job well done. She had saved them all, but her demeanor remained humble, as if this had been just another day in the sky. It didn't take long for word of her heroism to spread. The airport was quickly swarmed by news crews, their cameras clicking and rolling as they surrounded the plane. The passengers, still shaken, shared their stories of the chaos in the sky and the miraculous landing that followed. Everyone wanted to speak to Maya, but she had already started to make her way down the plane's steps, her eyes scanning the surroundings as she adjusted her jacket. She wasn't one for the spotlight, but the media had other plans. A few journalists approached her, asking for interviews. Maya paused, a polite smile on her face, but she didn't engage. Instead, she turned to the airport staff who had rushed to help, ready to assist the passengers off the plane and get them to safety. Preston stood off to the side, observing Maya from a distance. His mind was still reeling from the events that had unfolded in the last few hours. He had been forced to confront his own biases, and the sharp contrast between the arrogant man he had once been and the humble gratitude he now felt was overwhelming. He could hear snippets of the conversation between the journalists, talking about Maya's calm under pressure, her unflinching confidence in the face of chaos. Her bravery had captured the public's imagination, and it was clear she was quickly becoming a national sensation. The social media posts flooded in, praising her for saving the lives of everyone on board. Hashtags like #HeroInTheSky and #AirForcePilot hit trending status within minutes. The moment that struck Preston the most, however, was when he saw Maya's name begin to appear on various news outlets. The stories highlighted her military career, her Air Force service, and the groundbreaking work she was doing for women in aviation. The reports didn't focus on her as just a woman or just a soldier. They focused on her as a hero. He had underestimated her, dismissed her at first, but now he could only stand by and watch as she became a symbol of excellence, of quiet strength. As the interviews continued, Preston found himself in the background, standing a little taller than before, his demeanor different from how it had been just hours ago. Something inside him had shifted, something irrevocable. He approached Maya slowly, unsure of what he could say to express the gratitude and respect he felt. "Maya," he started, his voice sincere but still tinged with hesitation. I don't know how to say this. I misjudged you, and I'm sorry." Maya turned to face him, her expression as neutral as ever. She met his gaze with the same calm assurance she had shown throughout the flight. "It's all right," she replied simply. "Most people do. It's nothing new." Preston swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. His usual pride and confidence had been replaced with something unfamiliar, humility. Maya had given him a lesson today, one he would never forget. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter now. "You saved us all." Maya offered a small nod. "I just did my job," she said, before turning back to the journalists. As the news of Maya's incredible landing continued to spread, it became clear that her story was something extraordinary. In a world filled with sensational headlines and fleeting moments of heroism, Maya's calm professionalism in the face of danger stood out like a beacon. She had been thrust into the public eye, and now the world was watching. News outlets from all over the country began to feature her story, but it wasn't just about the storm or the dramatic rescue. It was about the woman behind the calm demeanor, the woman who had defied the odds to save the lives of strangers. Her bravery, her focus, and her humility made her an icon. A symbol of strength and quiet confidence, she was celebrated as an example of what it meant to rise above adversity. The praise came from all corners. Aviation experts marveled at her quick thinking, her ability to take charge in such a harrowing situation. She was heralded as one of the finest pilots in the country, a woman who had proven herself time and time again in the most difficult circumstances. And it wasn't just the aviation community that took notice. Social media was abuzz with admiration for Maya, with thousands of people expressing their gratitude and support. But perhaps most inspiring was the fact that Maya was a woman who had broken through barriers and shattered stereotypes. Her story was a testament to the power of resilience and determination, a reminder that true leadership was about action, not titles or appearances. The hashtags #MayaTheHero and #BreakingBarriers flooded social media, and advocacy groups for women in aviation and the military found themselves using Maya's story to further their causes. Campaigns to promote greater gender equality in these fields gained momentum, with Maya becoming the face of a movement that sought to give women the recognition they deserved in traditionally male-dominated professions. Maya's humble response to all the attention was consistent with the person she had always been. She didn't seek accolades or the spotlight. But as the media continued to follow her every move, she realized that her story was something bigger than herself. It was about the power of representation, about the importance of showing the world that women, particularly women in the military, could be strong leaders in all aspects of life. Maya's social media posts, usually filled with personal updates and military-related content, began to include messages of empowerment. She didn't want to just be a hero in the eyes of the public. She wanted to use this newfound platform to encourage others, to show them that they too could overcome obstacles and rise to the occasion. The National Aviation Association reached out to her, inviting her to speak at their upcoming conference. They wanted to recognize her not only as a skilled pilot, but as a role model for future generations of women in aviation. Maya hesitated, but she knew that she had a responsibility to share her story. She accepted the invitation, knowing that this was just the beginning of her journey, not only as a pilot, but as a symbol of progress. Meanwhile, Preston, still reeling from the events of the past days, couldn't help but follow Maya's rise to fame with a growing sense of admiration. He saw how the world was embracing her, and he realized that the woman he had once mocked was now a beacon of courage. Maya had become a national symbol, and Preston, though still a wealthy and influential businessman, could only watch in awe as she continued to inspire millions. The aftermath of the harrowing flight was both surreal and transformative for everyone involved. For Preston, who had once viewed the world through a lens of privilege and superiority, everything had changed. His encounter with Maya had shattered his preconceived notions about strength, leadership, and what it truly meant to be brave. He found himself reflecting deeply on the way he had treated others, especially people like Maya, whom he had dismissed out of hand because of his own biases. He spent the next few days consumed by a mixture of guilt and awe. He had spent years building his wealth, his status, and his image. He had never once thought about how his behavior might affect others. Now, he couldn't help but feel a profound sense of shame about the way he had initially mocked Maya. The way she had handled the emergency, her unshakable calm and skill, was a far cry from the arrogance and shallow bravado he had built his life on. He knew, more than ever, that the person he had been was someone he no longer wanted to be. Preston began to reconsider how he approached relationships and people. He realized how often he had let his own arrogance blind him to the true worth of others. His business success, his wealth, his social standing, they were meaningless in the face of true bravery and character. He knew it was time for change. It wasn't just about apologizing for his earlier behavior. It was about making a concerted effort to do better, to treat everyone with the respect they deserved. Maya, on the other hand, returned to her base, where she was welcomed home as a hero. She had saved a plane full of people, but in her eyes, she had simply done her duty. Her peers were eager to praise her for her bravery, but Maya remained grounded, unshaken by the media frenzy that had followed her. Her achievements had been incredible, but she knew that the true value of her work came not from the accolades, but from the lives she had protected. Despite her fame, Maya chose to remain humble. She had always been a woman of quiet strength, and the whirlwind of recognition was not what she had sought. She didn't want to be seen as a symbol. She wanted to be seen as a pilot, a dedicated, skilled pilot who had done what was necessary to save her passengers. Yet, the more she thought about the attention she was receiving, the more she realized that her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was bigger than her. It was about the thousands of women who had been overlooked, underestimated, and denied opportunities. Her story was one of breaking barriers, and she knew that her journey could inspire others to keep fighting for recognition and respect. As Maya stood before her fellow Air Force officers, the respect in their eyes filled her with pride. They knew what it took to survive in a field where women were often treated as outsiders, and Maya had proven that it didn't matter who you were or where you came from. You could rise to the top through sheer determination and skill. Preston's reflection had led him to seek out Maya. He knew that he had to make amends for his previous treatment of her, not just with words, but with actions. He reached out to her publicly, through a heartfelt post on social media. His apology was long overdue, but he knew that it was the right step toward redemption. "I owe Maya Bennett more than an apology," he wrote. "I owe her my respect. Today, she taught me more than I could have ever learned in a boardroom. Thank you, Maya." Maya saw the post, and while she appreciated the gesture, it didn't change her view of him. She had never sought an apology, and she didn't need one. But the public acknowledgement of his mistake and his growth was a step in the right direction. Maya knew that change could start with one person's willingness to look beyond their biases, and perhaps Preston's journey would inspire others to do the same. As the weeks passed, Maya's story continued to reverberate across the country. Her name became synonymous with courage and resilience, but she had long since moved on from the media circus. To her, the recognition was fleeting. What mattered most was the impact she could have on the world beyond the headlines. Maya's work in the Air Force continued, but her newfound role as a role model brought with it new responsibilities. She began speaking at events, advocating for greater diversity and inclusion within the military and the aviation industry. Her message was clear. The sky was no longer the limit for women, and everyone, no matter their background or gender, deserved a chance to soar. She spoke at universities, met with young women who dreamed of following in her footsteps, and shared her experiences with anyone who would listen. Maya's voice became a powerful tool for change, and she used it to advocate for a world where women and minorities could thrive without barriers. Every speech, every meeting, every conversation was an opportunity to empower others, to show them that they too could overcome the obstacles in their lives and reach for the stars. Preston, too, found a new sense of purpose in the wake of his transformation. He used his wealth and influence to support causes that mattered, especially those that helped marginalized groups gain access to education, mentorship, and opportunities in fields where they had traditionally been underrepresented. He reached out to Maya once again, this time to offer his help in promoting the work she was doing to break down barriers. Maya accepted his support, knowing that change could only happen when people worked together, regardless of their past differences. The impact of that fateful flight went beyond just a moment of danger. It was the catalyst for a deep, lasting change in the lives of those involved. Maya's legacy became one of courage, strength, and the unwavering belief that true greatness lies not in the title or status one holds, but in the ability to rise above the challenges and inspire others to do the same. As for Maya, she never stopped doing what she loved. Every flight, every mission, every day was another chance to prove that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never seek recognition but simply do what's right. Her story would continue to inspire generations, reminding them all that, in the face of adversity, it is courage, humility, and the willingness to rise above that leaves the most lasting legacy. Maya's journey was one of quiet courage, resilience, and unshakable belief in her mission. From the skies above Aspen to the national spotlight, she proved that heroism doesn't come in the form of grand gestures, but in the ability to remain calm under pressure, to rise when others falter, and to serve others selflessly. Her legacy was not just in saving lives, but in inspiring countless individuals to follow their own paths, regardless of the obstacles in their way. For Preston, the journey was equally transformative. What began as arrogance and a rush to judgment turned into a profound lesson in humility. Maya had shown him the true meaning of respect, not as a superficial acknowledgement, but as a deep, genuine understanding of another person's worth. Through his reflection, he had learned that greatness isn't about wealth, status, or power. It's about character, empathy, and the courage to change. Maya's story continued to ripple outward, a legacy that transcended the headlines and inspired real, lasting change. The world she had once fought to prove herself in was beginning to recognize her for the incredible woman she was. But Maya knew, deep down, that her true worth was not defined by the accolades or the attention she received. It was found in the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference, of knowing that, in that moment when everything was on the line, she had done exactly what was needed. And as the days went on, the story of a pilot, a businessman, and a plane that nearly didn't land became more than just a tale of survival. It became a testament to the power of transformation, of breaking down barriers, and of how, in the end, it's not the storms we face that define us, but how we choose to navigate through them. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this entire story. We hope that Maya's journey and Preston's transformation resonated with you and left you feeling inspired. It's a reminder that change is possible, and that we all have the ability to rise above challenges and become better versions of ourselves. If you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more inspiring content like this. Feel free to leave a comment below and share your thoughts. We love hearing from you. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for more incredible stories to come.